And so began the Mufti's 4-year-long relationship with the Nazis. Throughout his time in Germany during the Second World War, el-Husseini appeared to enjoy a close working relationship with some of the highest-ranking Nazis. In the Grand Mufti's memoirs, published in 1999, he freely discusses his close relationship with SS Chief Heinrich Himmler, the man who was the architect of the extermination of the Jews. According to his own account, he often met Himmler for tea. On one such occasion, the Grand Mufti had his photograph taken with him. It contains a signed dedication from Himmler to His Eminence the Grand Mufti, a memento. This wasn't the only exchange of gifts between Mohammed al-Husseini and the Nazi leaders. The Grand Mufti even went to such lengths as having a Persian rug specially made for the Führer himself. From his bureau in Berlin, he also planned a series of radio broadcasts to the Middle East. His first came in December 1941, and he continued to broadcast throughout the entire war. But then his involvement with the Nazis became deeper and darker. In 1942, Himmler's deputy Reinhard Heydrich convened a meeting of Nazi officials who met here at Wannsee, near Berlin. At the meeting, the Nazi hierarchy launched their project to deal with the millions of Jews in Europe. They rubber-stamped the plan which became known as the final solution to the Jewish problem. It meant the systematic rounding up of Jews and their extermination in death camps all over Europe. So what did the Grand Mufti really know of the Nazis' plans?
The Mufti, as he himself acknowledged very clearly in his memoirs, was perfectly aware of the genocide. He was perfectly aware of the fact that the Nazis were perpetrating a genocide of European Jews. He tells himself in his memoir the story of his encounter in July 1943 with Himmler, during which Himmler told him that Germany was in the process of exterminating the Jews and had already killed 3 million of them.
Über den Bergen von Bosnien. Deutsche Kampfflugzeuge zerstören die Schlupfwinkel kommunistischer Banditen.
As the Second World War progressed and Germany began to suffer defeats, their troops became more and more stretched. One area of conflict where there was a desperate need for military support was the Balkans. There, the communist partisans were growing in strength. The Germans needed more resources urgently, especially soldiers. One possible solution was the drafting of Bosnian Muslims. But they had been strictly forbidden by Muslim leaders from collaborating with the Nazis. So the German authorities turned to their trusted Muslim voice, the Grand Mufti, to exert pressure on the power brokers in the region. In the spring of 1943, the Mufti successfully convinced Bosnian Muslims to ignore the clerics. By doing so, he played a major role in establishing a new unit of the SS, the most feared and fanatical part of the German armed forces. It was the SS that was responsible for some of the most brutal and horrendous crimes perpetrated in the whole of the war. the unit that the Grand Mufti helped set up became known as the 13th Waffen SS Mountain Division and consisted almost entirely of Muslims. However, again, there is no evidence that this unit was actively involved in any anti-Jewish atrocities. But the Grand Mufti went further. He wrote letters to European leaders urging them not only to stop sending their Jewish citizens to Palestine, but to actively redirect them to Poland.
He knew that there were concentration camps. That was publicly known. And therefore he was advocating that the Jews be sent to concentration camps instead of being sent to Palestine. So we can see here a qualitative difference between a Palestinian national leader who would say to any governments, don't send your Jews to Palestine. That's one thing. And a Palestinian leader would say, don't send your Jews to Palestine, but send them to Poland in concentration camps. Here you move from what could be seen as a legitimate national position or nationalist position into a criminal statement. And indeed, the Mufti had a very abject role during those years. There's no way, therefore, one can excuse him for that or find any justification.
The Mufti's justification was probably to get help in his efforts to attack the British in his homeland. He asked the Nazi hierarchy to organize sabotage missions against the Allies in the Middle East. His requests met with some success. Teams of saboteurs were parachuted into Iraq, Jordan, and Palestine, where they targeted Allied facilities such as telephone lines, pipelines, bridges, and railways. But when he asked the German Air Command to carry out bigger raids along the Palestine coast and on Tel Aviv, he was less successful. Hermann Goering, the head of the Luftwaffe, rejected the plan, saying he simply didn't have enough men and machines to divert from Europe. But despite being let down by the Nazi hierarchy that he had come to trust, he continued to throw his support behind them. On March 1st, 1944, during one of his many broadcasts, he said, "Arabs, rise as one man and fight for your sacred rights. Kill the Jews wherever you find them. This pleases God, history, and religion. This saves your honor. God is with you."
We are not here dealing with, let's say, a kind of average nationalist leader fighting for the independence of his nation, for the liberation of his nation, and willing to make some tactical compromises or alliances for that purpose. No, we are dealing with somebody who believed in a real convergence between himself and what he represented and the Nazis on the terrain of anti-Semitism.
And the drive goes on. Hanover is captured, and civilians wave white handkerchiefs and line the streets to watch a victorious army rumble through to the east.
As the Second World War drew to its conclusion in the spring of 1945, it became clear to the Grand Mufti that defeat for Hitler and the Nazis was only a matter of time. Al-Husseini had escaped capture before, and he was about to do it again.
This is the defeat of Germany. Facing Air Chief Marshal Tedder and Marshal Zhukov is a conquered German general. Keitel signs the surrender.
Just a day after Germany surrendered to the Allies, Al-Husseini boarded a plane for neutral Switzerland. But he was denied political asylum and moved swiftly on to Paris. A A year later, in the spring of 1946, the Grand Mufti's actions during the war were examined at the Nuremberg trials.
The Mufti was not indicted as part of the Nuremberg tribunal and all that. There wasn't enough evidence accumulated against him, despite the efforts of course, the Zionist movement. The fact is that, of course, Husseini did everything I mentioned in terms of propaganda, contribution to the propaganda. He was a close collaborator of the Nazis, but he was not himself directly involved in war crimes.
Now the Grand Mufti beat one more hasty retreat, this time to the Egyptian capital Cairo, where he was finally given political asylum and a hero's welcome. So what is one to make of the Grand Mufti of Palestine? To some, he was simply a committed nationalist religious leader, one who was driven into the arms of the Germans by an unsympathetic British government, which repeatedly let him and his people down. They see him as a man faced with losing everything he'd promised his people he would protect. A man who would go to any lengths to see his Palestine remain solely in the hands of the Arabs.
Some people in the Arab world had tried to if not justify, at least to find attenuating circumstances for the Mufti's collaboration with Nazism through the famous saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
But to others, his relationship with the Nazis is damning.
When you know about the nature of the force with which you are allying, and this force is committing such a huge crime against humanity, then this enemy of my enemy does not really hold water as an argument. The abjection, the abomination of collaborating with such a regime is clear.
Mohammed Amin al-Husseini never returned to Jerusalem after his escape in 1937. The Grand Mufti of Palestine eventually died in exile in Beirut in 1974, aged 79. His place as leader of the Palestinian Arabs was eventually taken by a relative, Mohammed Yasser Rahman al-Husseini, better known as Yasser Arafat. In August 2002, Arafat gave an interview in which he referred to Mohammed al-Husseini as a symbol of Palestinian Arab resistance. He called him simply a hero. But it's not a view shared by many.